And when I crossed that finish line, it meant to me that I'd set a goal that seemed impossible to some, but that I had dedicated myself to, and I made it.
Welcome to Chatter That Matters, the podcast where we explore extraordinary human journeys. Stories of people who overcome obstacles, chase their dreams, and change their world and ours for the better. Today's guest is someone who's lived through the unimaginable and chosen not just to survive, but to serve, summit, and inspire. Sheryl Ramstad was 29 when her first solo flight ended in a horrible plane crash.
The engine's sputtering, the engine quit, help, and I can't stop it.
Her body became what she calls a human inferno.
I ended up throwing all my body weight against the door that was on fire.
Doctors gave her less than a 1% chance of survival. But survive she did. And what followed wasn't just a recovery, it was reinvention.
I wanted to be a perfect parent, and I wanted to be a perfect lawyer. So I really had to face that, and I had to realize that I'd do the best I could.
From federal prosecutor to family court judge to corrections commissioner under Jesse Ventura, to running marathons, climbing Kilimanjaro, launching a second career in nursing in her 60s, Sheryl's story reads like a blueprint for how to live life full throttle.
I kept to that religiously.
And today we dive into her compelling new memoir, Living Life Full Throttle, Surviving, Serving, and Summiting, and explore not just how she endured, but how she transcended.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated.
Sheryl, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Tony.
In your memoir, you describe the joy of learning to fly, mentally expanding your horizons, and embracing the unfamiliar. And you talked about how you dreamed with your husband of just using that skill to fly away for weekend escape. So take us back to those early days where everybody dreams about learning how to fly, but you actually went after it.
I love the vantage point of getting in the sky and seeing the landscape, especially in the wintertime. Minnesota winters are beautiful, and it looked like a painting when I was looking down on the snow. For me, it was a thrill to be able to fly, and I was confident that I had the ability. I had changed instructors because my first instructor I didn't necessarily have confidence in. And so I was really careful about who I was flying with and my flying itself. I was very conscientious as a student pilot.
And as you're a student and you're working up to that first solo flight, is it always in the back of your mind that I'm not going to have my instructor beside me? There's one day that I'm going to be up in that air and this is all within my destiny? Yes
and no. It was an exciting prospect for me. I'm an independent person, a lot of confidence, and I thought, it's time.
The moment of truth is you're flying your first solo flight, and obviously it doesn't go as planned.
Well, we started out with my instructor seated in the seat next to me. It was a 2-seat plane, and we did a pattern, which is a rectangular run around the airport, and you go out and, you're cleared and you touch down. And so we did that for about 35 or 40 minutes. And then my instructor looked at me and he said, it's time. I taxied in and let him out and I took off. He had instructed me that a solo would involve 3 touch and goes, which would mean going up in that pattern, that rectangular pattern, 3 times. Between each of the first and the second and the third, I'd touch down and then I'd take off again and go in the rectangular pattern. The third time, I'd taxi in, get out of the plane, and I would have soloed, which is a real rite of passage for a new pilot. It was the 4th of July weekend, so there was a lot of air traffic, but I was fine. The third touch and go, I went up. I was on the downwind leg. I was on the approach. I was cleared for landing, so I was just about to complete my dream when all of a sudden the engine quit. Dead silence. It was about 20 seconds from the time the engine quit to the time that I crashed. I had time enough for 4 communications with the control tower. The engine sputtering, the engine quit, help, and I can't stop it. Well, during this time, the control tower wasn't able to communicate with me because they were trying to clear the airspace so that the pilots around me, they could tell I was in trouble, and so the pilots around me would give me the space. Meanwhile, in this 20 seconds, I was looking for a place where I could land without jeopardizing other people's lives. Truthfully, Tony, I didn't think I'd survive because I knew that this was serious. But below me was the Mississippi River, full of boats that day, I-94, Interstate 94, full of cars. It was the 4th of July weekend, so you can imagine the traffic. The state capitol, an immovable building, and a condensed, heavily populated residential area. So there really wasn't a landing space or a clearing for me to land. So as I'm going down, I set the nose at landing speed, and I was looking for a playground. I saw a playground. But on the way down, a power line cut the wing off. It sprayed all the fuel from the plane's wing onto the cockpit and exploded. I was engulfed in an inferno. What stopped the plane is as the wing was sheared off, it hit a tree. When it stopped, it was 20 feet from a woman sunbathing in her backyard. I thought, I got to get out of here. And I realized that my bones weren't broken, but the door had jammed. I ended up throwing all my body weight against the door that was on fire. It was a miracle that the door opened. I climbed through the fire, put my hand on the part of the wing that was left. In fact, my hand was burned to the bone. They weren't sure they could save it. They were talking about amputating it. I got out, and a man from the neighborhood came over to me, and he said, I'm a commercial pilot, and all I can tell you is you did a damn good job of flying, saving your life and saving those of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, a whole crowd was gathering around. They felt the shaking in their homes, ushered me to the Catholic church across the street, ironically, and I collapsed on the sidewalk outside the Catholic church. The priest came out, gave me last rites. You might wonder what was my mental state at that point. It was clear as a bell. I can remember it as if it were yesterday. The day before, I'd been at the lake and I'd been talking to my mother, who was deathly afraid of flying. And I told her, don't worry, Mom, it's safe. It's safer than crossing the street.
Yeah.
The first concern I had when the fire chief asked me who he could contact for next of kin was, don't call my mother, because I knew that she would be absolutely unglued. So I said, please call my brother and have my brother call my mother, because I knew that would be a softer way for her to learn.
You're so calm in how you talk about it. Because to me, it's like I'm thinking shock. I'm thinking you're badly burned. You survived a plane crash. But is it just you remembering what happened then? Or were you truly this coherent in terms of being able to sort of almost take control of a situation when people are at the same time are giving you last rites?
Well, that was then. When I got to the burn unit, the paramedics transported me, and I remember the conversation they had. I'd been training for a marathon that morning. I was dry as a bone, and I wanted water because here I was burned. I had run 5 miles that morning, and I remember asking the paramedics, could I have some water, please? Well, I remember the two of them arguing, well, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. Well, we'll have to ask when we get to the burn unit. And I thought, then it's going to be too late. But when I got to the burn unit, last thing I remember, having my clothes cut off because they had stuck to my skin. I had polyester and they had stuck to my skin. Somebody came in and said, there's a reporter and a cameraman from the St. Paul Pioneer Press wanting to come in and take pictures and talk to her. She's in no shape to have anybody talk to her. That's the last thing I remember until I woke up in the burn unit where there were 3 other patients in the room. My mom was sitting across from me, asleep with a Bible in her lap. She was a force to be reckoned with. She taught me that I was a strong person, that I could do anything I wanted, even though my older brother In those days, there was a distinct disadvantage to being a girl or a female. But she taught me that anything I wanted to do was within my reach and I should go for it. Her presence gave me great courage.
Give me a sense of how badly you were injured, because from what I read in both your book and in another interview, your odds of surviving wasn't even 5%.
I was burned over 37% of my body, my arms, my hands, my legs, my back. My hair was singed, and my face was burned, but fortunately it was first degree, so I didn't end up with scars. But the rest of my body has grafted skin taken from my stomach and elsewhere. What happened after I'd been in the burn unit for about a week, I gained 40 pounds. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Well, then I started throwing up uncontrollably. And the nurse who was taking care of me called the head surgeon and said, it was a Sunday night at 8:00, and called and said, I don't think she'll make it till morning. You got to get here. I went into surgery and they did a 6-hour surgery. And that's when my life was really in jeopardy. That's when they gave me less than a 1% chance of survival. The doctors said later that they looked at each other when they opened me up and all this gas came out of my stomach. What are we going to do? Because they'd never faced a burn patient with peritonitis. I was full of infection. Infection is a big fear of people with burns because if you get infected, you can die. So they worked for several hours, taking each of my organs out of my body, cleaning them with saline solution multiple times to get rid of every trace that they could of the infection so that it wouldn't linger. When they finished, they didn't feel like they could sew me back up. I have an incision from my breast line down to my pubic line because they didn't know if they'd have to go back in. They'd already taken out 18 inches of my small intestine. So they used clamps to clamp me shut that whole distance. So when I left the operating room, I was out of it. They told my family I was going to be in the woods for 2 weeks. Now that was doctor lingo for life and death. I was on the line. They did not have any idea. So they infused this very strong, potent antibiotic through IVs for a solid 2 weeks. And, miracle it took. And 2 weeks later, I finally came to, then began the long journey back of gaining use of my hands and the other burn recovery that I had to face.
So as you start making your way back, I was moved by when you talk about the tub room torture, how the nurses were urging you to scream to let the pain out. Did you ever, when you're going through this kind of recovery, saying, is it worth it?
My mother had a saying, it's always darkest before the dawn. And I knew that there'd be a dawn someplace out there. Plus, I had the strength of my faith, my family, and my friends. I can't overstate how important it was that my mother was at my side. Every surgery, she brought me a charm, a gold charm. And the first one was a cross, and then there was a wishbone. And every surgery, she gave me that to look forward to. My dad was at my bedside every surgery. He flew down from North Dakota, where he was trying to run a business at the time, but he was there every single surgery, 7 of them. I got letters from all over. The governor of the state at the time was Al Quee, and he wrote me, and I'll never forget his letter. It said, we share the good wishes of all the people who are hoping for your recovery. The Lord must not be finished with you yet. That was motivating. I thought I've got more to do. I'm 29 years old. I want to have a family. I want to go back to my career. I was a federal prosecutor at the time. I loved the courtroom. I thrived on litigation. And I knew that even though I couldn't work on cases, I had people in my office bring files to the bed. First place I went when I got out of the burn unit was to the federal courthouse. One of the people who came to my bedside had been burned himself. He was chief of the U.S. District Court in Minnesota, Federal Judge Edward Devitt. And he'd show up at 6:00 in the morning. Well, visitors weren't allowed until later in the day, but nobody was going to tell him that he wasn't entitled to come. And he shared with me that he had been burned in the war, swimming through a sea of burning oil. Gave me hope. There was a nurse who saw the picture that my folks had put up beside me, beside my bedside, of me running a race. Who's that? I said, that was me. I said, well, I was training for a marathon at one point. She said, in 2 years, you'll be running a marathon and I'll be at the finish line to cheer you on. And that became my goal.
An interview you did with Porchlight Books, you talk about you viewed your path to recovery as distinctly yours to tread. Felt traditional talk therapy had limitations for you. Everything I'm unpacking, you're 29, you're a federal prosecutor, you want to learn how to fly, you learn how to fly, you're running a marathon. If you always felt you were sort of ordained to make your destiny a matter of choice, not chance?
I like that phrase, choice, not chance. We're given a life to live and we have the opportunity to make choices. And I made choices that were challenging to me, but I found myself invigorated by the challenge. As far as the therapists, I had roomed with some psychology students when I was in college. I remember one of the graduate students saying to another one, I'm angry with you. I don't have a reason. I don't know why. I'm just angry with you. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. I always measured it against what was logical. Nobody could be in my skin. Nobody could instill in me a will to live. I had this journey that I had to take, and I had to take it one step at a time. I didn't feel like a therapist could understand or could help me.
Through this entire recovery, you have people coming and saying, in 2 years, you're going to run this marathon, or your mom giving you the wishbone charm, but it manifested. Talk to me about the grandma's marathon as part of your healing journey and how it felt to finish that, to cross the finish line.
When I was able to get out of the burn unit, I had a full body suit. I had gloves, I had a long sleeve jacket, and I had tights. And the purpose of those was to put pressure on the burned areas so that they wouldn't rise up. I wore those for 2 years. So in the burn unit, I started on the exercise bike. And then I have a very good friend who actually was a news anchor, and she had quit smoking. And I thought, I think I need a buddy to train for this marathon with me because it's going to be we were talking about months of training. So I convinced her that it would be a way for her to not gain weight, even though she'd quit smoking. So she and I got a little group of women together and started training. It was interesting because once a news anchor, always a news anchor, she had to make a news story out of this. So she had a cameraman following us for those many months. We started in the snow. I remember one time the cameraman was trying to capture our feet for artistic purposes and was leaning out with his priceless camera, holding the steering wheel with one hand and the camera in the other one, missed completely that there was a tree in his path. So we had some incidents like that, but it wasn't a matter of what our time would be. We'd spend a whole day on a training run. We'd run 15 miles, stop for Dairy Queen at lunch. And we had a goal in mind. Our goal was completing the marathon. And I felt like I had to go the extra mile because I was coming back from this terrible tragedy and I didn't want to hold up the others in my running group. So I would get out there 6 o'clock in the morning in my full body garments and run extra so that I could keep up and meet my goal. I also had a meticulous schedule that I'd prepared each day and each week, how I could build my distance so that I could eventually get to that 26.2 miles. I kept to that religiously. I wouldn't let anything get in the way. Rain, snow, sleet. I remember being out one time when there was a tornado and I could see it across the lake. And I thought, I got to finish my run. And so I was pretty dedicated to finishing that marathon. And when I did, it was a thrill. I have to say, I got choked up.
How long after the plane crash did you were you capable of actually finishing that marathon?
A year and 11 months.
Wow.
As a girl, I'd never had really team sports where I had the chance to have people cheering me on. Well, this was a place where people were cheering me on and cheering other runners on. It was just such a thrill. And when I crossed that finish line, it meant to me that I'd set a goal that seemed impossible to some, but that I had dedicated myself to, and I made it.
Were you surrounded with people that realized this is much more than just training for a marathon, which is itself is an accomplishment? But did people realize that that goal that you set for yourself was really instrumental in how you were healing and how you wanted to reclaim your life?
There were a handful of people because the marathon was a 2.5-hour drive from where I live. So my family was there. The families of other people who were on my team were there. But when it really became apparent to others what a significant goal this had been was when my friend, the news anchor's 3-part story was aired on the news every night during the week of the marathon. That's when it really became apparent to others.
When I return, there's lots more to talk about. Sheryl and I delve further into the amazing journey she's on, one that in many ways began with her plane crash and the journey back. We talk about her incredible book, Living Life Full Throttle, my 3 takeaways, and then I talk about a small business called Pop-Up Chapel that deserves our support.
Hi, this is Tony Chapman. I want to talk to you about what RBC Wealth Management is doing to support healthy aging. Old age is becoming old news. We're living longer, and planning for our future means we need to integrate health, wellness, and our financial matters. RBC Wealth Management is partnering with leading experts and organizations like the MIT Age Lab, the National Institute on Aging, the Women's Brain Health Initiative, Elder Caring, and the Women's Age Lab. Why? To provide you with comprehensive resources covering every aspect of you aging well. This includes support for your physical and mental health, caregiving, maintaining financial stability, and preparing for later life health issues, ensuring you can age safely and comfortably, and ideally in your own home. With RBC Wealth Management, you create a personalized plan that adapts as your needs change, giving you peace of mind and security. Visit rbcwealthmanagement.com and learn more about healthy aging and start planning for your future. Healthy aging? Well, that matters to you, to me, and to RBC.
I can't overstate how important it was that my mother was at my side. Every surgery, she brought me a charm. The first one was a cross, and then there was a wishbone, and every surgery she gave me that to look forward to. I thought I've got more to do.
Today, my special guest is Sheryl Ramstad. Her airplane crashes in her first solo flight, badly burned, given a 1% chance to live. And live she does. Another part that really moved me is when you discuss your intimacy limitations, the PTSD after the crash, that it wasn't, as much as you were in the hospital dreaming of, I want to get back and have a family, this fairy tale relationship with your husband where you're learning to fly because you want to have this ability to escape, that changed as well for you.
I wanted to have a family. I knew that with this incision I'd had and this infernal infection, it was going to be challenging. I talked to my husband, and we, short time after I got out of the hospital, started applying for adoption because I had grown up with a cousin who had adopted 4 children. They spent a lot of time with our family, and I saw that there's other ways to build a family. And so it was my goal to build a family through what I call intentional parenting. That was an interesting process because I had to face my own limitations. I had to face the fact that it was hard for me to be in a room where a candle was burning. And I thought, how can I be at a child's birthday party where they've got candles on their cake if I can't tolerate being near candles? And I thought, how can my arms, my hands, how can I hold this baby? But again, my desire, the end result was to parent, and my family had always been very important to me, and it was important to me to have a family of my own. And so a short time after I had my surgeries, we got notified. It was almost 3 years from the time of my accident. We were notified by one of the adoption agencies that our name on the list had come up to the top and that we could adopt a little girl from Korea. She came on November 11th. My last surgery was that Thanksgiving. So my hand was all bandaged up. I was having a hard time holding her, but I just loved being her mom. To this day, I just adore all three of my children, and I couldn't have asked for any more.
In the book, Living Life Full Throttle, you also mentioned, your father who came and trying to build a business and sitting by your bed, his first question was, couldn't you find a Caucasian child? How did he come to terms with that? He saw those children grow up. Did he realize that love matters most?
Yes, he came to terms with it the instant he saw her at the airport. She melted his heart. He came full circle. When we got our third child from Korea, he and my mother went over to Korea to bring her back.
Oh.
After that, when my mom died, he took my kids on cruises and they adored him. And they adored him so much that when my youngest went to college, she had tattooed on her ankle, Grampy. And although he didn't like tattoos, he couldn't say much because he was so touched by the fact that he had meant that much to her. So
beautiful. And Sarah's your first daughter. And you talk about this delicate dance between motherhood and career. This is a woman in bed asking for legal files. You're passionate about the law, and yet you had to find a new dance and work-life balance.
I had a fight with perfectionism. I am a perfectionist, and I wanted to be a perfect parent, and I wanted to be a perfect lawyer, and there's only so many hours in the day. So I really had to face that, and I had to realize that I'd do the best I could. I made the day as long as I could. I'd sleep 4 or 5 hours, be preparing things for the kids to take to school between 10 and midnight when I was done with working my files. I made it to every ball game that they played in. I remember one field trip, hayride, and I remember being there with a file on my lap during this hayride. So I was sometimes trying to do it all at one time, which I learned was not a good way to give full attention to my children. In the fullness of time, I think my children really recognized and appreciated and took pride in what I did. Now I have my oldest daughter's working full time while she's got 2 children. My youngest daughter realized that she had a choice and decided to stay at home with her only child. My mother had given up her career to raise my brother and me at home, and I always felt badly. I always felt like she'd missed something, and I felt like she'd lived her life through us. And I didn't want that to happen with my children. I wanted them to have their lives, but I wanted to have my life so that I didn't end up living my life through them, because I think it puts undue pressure on children to feel that they've got to be satisfying a mother's unfulfilled dreams.
Moving the story forward, you become a judge, and then you request going to family court. Why?
Well, part of it was I like challenges. I thought if I could make an impact any place, the challenge would be to do so in family court, because there's so much rancor and so much contentiousness. Child custody battles, the children are pulled in various directions. In fact, my heart is really with children. I'm now a guardian ad litem of children in court so that I can represent their interests pro bono. There's a different way. There's a better way. And I wanted to be a part of trying to make family court more a matter of reconciliation than recrimination. And quite frankly, I wanted them to see that their family court matter wasn't life and death. I knew what life and death were. I knew that line between life and death. And I think it gave me a perspective, helping them see beyond the immediate conflict and try to get them to look at a way to compromise for the sake of the family, for the sake of the children, for the sake of their own futures.
And you actually fail at something. The county attorney race, you don't succeed with it, but Jesse Ventura says, you have way too much talent to waste. And he appoints you the Commissioner of Corrections. And you talk about that moment, once again, redefining your sense of purpose.
Well, I've always had a commitment to the underserved. When I started out my career, I was a public defender representing the underserved. When I was in law school, I worked at the Federal Reformatory for Women in Alderson, West Virginia, again, with those who were incarcerated. The corrections role gave me an opportunity, again, to look at not the way things were, but the way that things might be, to identify what could break that cycle of recidivism, what could meaningfully change people's lives from hearts of stone to hearts of flesh. And I saw chemical dependency treatment. I saw mental health. I saw faith-based programs, and I saw education, higher education. So we had a partnership. We established the first ever partnership with Hazelden Foundation. The two largest chemical dependency treatment providers in the state of Minnesota were the Department of Corrections and Hazelden. The two had never talked to each other. So I had a citizens advisory group, a partnership. So the Department of Corrections would allow Hazelden people to come in and learn how to do chemical dependency treatment in a correctional setting, because that was where the dollars were and that was where the future was for chemical dependency treatment. Meanwhile, the Department of Corrections had no money for educating its staff, and Hazelden had this thriving program, publishing and of training. So they gave free of charge to Department of Corrections staff the ability to access those. And so it was a win-win. Similarly, faith-based. I flew to various places in the country. Texas was the first state that had a faith-based program. Spent a weekend in that prison observing it. There was less hostility between the staff and the inmates. There was less assaultive behavior between the inmates. People were getting mentors and they were getting out and they were living life, for the most part, crime-free. That became my goal, is to create such a program in the state of Minnesota. Came back and I thought, the last hurdle is the governor. And this weekend was the very same weekend that the article had been published in Playboy, quoting him as saying religion was for the weak-minded. So I didn't want his staff to be involved because I thought I didn't want any undue influence. I had confidence that he and I could have a rapport. So I invited him to go on the state plane to a prison opening. So I had one-on-one time with him and attention. Well, that was the significance of that flight. It was my first time in a small plane since my airplane crash. And again, I just had to put my goal over my own personal fear and think this was worth it. This is something I had to do.
There was a lot of trauma that was involved with getting on that plane, wasn't there?
Definitely. In fact, to this day, Tony, I just got back on a flight last night, and it was a rough flight. And we were coming through inclement weather. And to this day, I say a prayer and I shudder. I mean, I really have never gotten over that fear. Every plane crash I see, I read about, I relive it. But I also had made this commitment to my staff, to myself, to the offender population. And I can't explain it other than to say, when I was in the burn unit and I had to put my own desire to grit my teeth and make it through this horrible tub room, it was a matter of just determination. So when I got on the plane, he said, "Don't worry." He said, "My wife, Terry, is a white knuckle flyer. We'll get through this fine." And I had done my due diligence, so I was able to show him that recidivism's reduced with faith-based programming. I was able to show him that we could produce measurable results, because that was Governor Ventura's goal, was to show measurable results. His comment to me as we were getting off the plane at that prison opening was, as long as it's voluntary and nobody's forced into it, you can go ahead. Now that program has been in existence over 20 years, and it's expanded to our women's facility. It's now kind of a showcase.
What took you so long to write Living Life Full Throttle? So much positivity and possibility. It's this magical fairy tale. What made you finally get at it, put pen to paper?
I'd gone back to school, earned my doctorate in nursing practice so I could give back to the burn unit. Again, giving back is an important piece of recovery. And so I worked in the very burn unit that I'd been a patient and tried to help people there. And after that, I became a nursing professor. I finally thought, people had said to me for many, many years, I just casually, they'd notice my hand was wrinkled or they noticed my scars, understand that I'd climbed Kilimanjaro. And they said, "You ought to write a book about that." And I said, I'm too busy living my life to write about it. Well, at that point, when I was leaving the active workplace, I thought, if not now, when? And I am a firm believer I don't want to have any regrets when I go to my grave. Went to a couple writers' conferences, hired an editor in Chicago, found a writing buddy in Chicago, and began the process. And for 2 years, I worked through writing the memoir. But it was appropriate to do it then because I had the benefit of time and perspective and seeing how things had, in the fullness of time, really worked out. Like going back to nursing school, I was doing a support group in the burn unit. A man I'd been helping who had a gas can explode in his face. I'd been helping him with dealing with his recovery. And his wife came over and said, "Oh, I've heard so much about you. Thank you for helping my husband." She said, "I know about your crash. You almost hit our house." And I thought, what goes around comes around.
Sheryl, I very rarely get through an entire book just because I put out a show every week, but I read yours. I imagine it as a Netflix series. It's a series of events. I said it's almost like you could have a different person in each one of these, but it's one person that's lived this life. What do you think is the connective tissue? What do you think is the thread that binds all of this together? Is it just really a sense of always having this overarching goal that continues to power you through these different parts of your life?
I live according to some principles. I climbed Kilimanjaro because I wanted to raise money for Books for Africa to send over books to these children in Africa who had none.
But you didn't just climb the mountain. You also had a fear of heights.
I did.
I find this real juxtaposition between these crazy personal goals that you set for yourself and also at the same time how it brings positive karma to the planet.
It's important to me to face my fears, work through them. You're right. Climbing Kilimanjaro, I still am afraid of heights. And yet, looking down and seeing, a sheer drop off, I realized that, I just had to put one foot ahead of the next and keep going. And that's kind of been my life story. I just have to put one foot ahead of the next and keep going. The one thing that I have not been able to overcome, quite frankly, Tony, is my claustrophobia. Hypnosis, I've gone through talking to the doctor who saved my life, and he said that comes from being in a cockpit that was on fire. I may never get over that. He said it's something that I'll always have to live with.
Do you feel all of this happened for a reason? Do you feel that young girl, the plane crash, burning, putting your body weight up, finding a way to survive, was somehow the context you needed to live the life you've lived?
I am a person of faith, and that's why I put my faith over my fears. I also am a person who follows where I'm feeling led. And that's that inner voice that I can't explain to other people. I can't explain why I went through 4 years of taking prerequisites while I was sitting full-time as a judge, one at a time, without telling anybody in my family that I wanted to become a nurse. But I felt led to be at the bedside of burn survivors because I felt like I understood what they were going through and could give back to them. It's the combination of feeling led to do things and doing them without letting others influence me. When I quit my judgeship, I resigned. I'd been appointed to a new term and I resigned. I didn't tell anybody I was going back to school full time. My brother knew and he thought I was crazy. He said, "Your dad would roll over in his grave." He said, "Most people strive to become a judge. Why would you resign your judgeship to go back to nursing school?" The memoir gave me a chance to look at, in the fullness of time, how things had not necessarily been clear at the time, but by following where I felt led and by putting faith over fear, things unfolded. And I don't know that I was predestined because of the crash. I don't think that's the case. I think we are dealt a hand and we have to play the hand that we're dealt and do the best that we can. And I was dealt a hand that I did the best I could to make the most of my life as a burn survivor.
Sheryl, I always end my podcast with my 3 takeaways. And one word is really what roared through the whole thing. And it's about a journey. And I think about your mom giving you that first charm as a cross. And then each time you went through surgery, giving you another, and really just saying, this is going to be a journey I'm going to be with you on, but you're going to find your way through it. And how that journey manifested into these extraordinary goals you gave yourself. I mean, somebody that was screaming in a tub covered in burns is also saying, I'm going to run a marathon. Finally finds a way back into the courtroom and becomes a judge, decides, no, I want to work with families because I can understand, I can have empathy. Going back to nursing school, it's not what you're given, it's what you do about it. And really comes back to one of my favorite quotes that I used earlier, that destiny is not a matter of chance, it's a matter of choice. I just think you've made some extraordinary choices, and I'm hoping that the people listening to this podcast buy your book and experience your journey in life, because the lessons you've learned about facing fear, putting one foot ahead of another as you did in the mountains, getting back in a small airplane because there was something more important than your own personal claustrophobia, I think are great lessons in life for everybody. So I really, truly appreciate you sharing that on Chatter That Matters and being part of the show.
Well, thank you, Tony. I just hope if people are facing something hard, adversity, or rebuilding their own lives after loss, I'd love for them to check out my book, Living Life Full Throttle, Surviving, Serving, and Summiting. I really believe it can help them find their own way forward.
Chatter That Matters. Spotlight.
Small businesses are at the heart of our economy. And today I want to spotlight one that's fighting to keep love alive in the most beautiful way. Pop-Up Chapel Company isn't your traditional wedding business. It's built for couples who want a meaningful, stylish, and stress-free wedding without the overwhelming price tag. And now it needs our support. Its owner, Alicia Thurston, a former wedding photographer who's captured hundreds of love stories, bought the business because she believes weddings should be joyful, inclusive, affordable, and sustainable. Pop-Up Chapel shows up at these wonderful venues like greenhouses, museums, and gardens, creating unforgettable experiences at a fraction of the cost. But like many small businesses, they're fighting against rising costs, changing economy, and the challenge of getting the attention of the people that matter most to you. So if you believe in love and creativity and supporting entrepreneurs who do things differently, find out more at popupchapel.ca. That's popupchapel.ca. Let's help this incredible small business owner and Alicia's dreams and love keep growing.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.